Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our supplier webinar. So we currently have Mr. Miguel Campos, and he is the Senior Business Development Manager at Berkshire Hathaway. So today we're going to be talking about travel agent errors and emissions coverage, and basically all this information. But the biggest thing is, why do you need this as a travel agent? Why do you need to carry your own policy? So Miguel, I'm so excited to have you. I'm so excited to have you. And listen, you can take it away. We've been waiting for this.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for having us, Tyra. It's always a pleasure to be able to do this. Just insurance in general is this elusive concept in general, and E&O insurance seems to be an even more elusive concept in the business world. So I am Miguel Campos. I'm a Senior Business Development Manager here with Berkshire Hathaway Travel Protection, which is part of Berkshire Hathaway Specialty Insurance out of Boston. And I'll get into that. So I'm going to go over this webinar a little bit quickly so I can get into some more detailed information at the end of it. But all the information I'm going to be going over with you now is information that you're going to need to know regardless of everything we discuss at the end of the webinar. And then all my information will be given to you either directly from the webinar itself or from Tyra. So that way, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, need quotes, etc., you can get a hold of me and my team, and we can reach out and help out further. So, all right. So first and foremost here, gotta get this over here. There we go. So a little bit about us. We are Berkshire Hathaway Travel Protection. That's our marketing name. Like I said, we are a subsidiary, wholly owned subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway Specialty Insurance. That's the mother company in Boston. They write tons of insurance all over the world. This is the division that handles the travel and tour operator and meeting event planning insurance. So if you ever see these names, especially in insurance, you see multiple names and they all funnel up to the mother company. We're Berkshire Hathaway Travel Protection, but if you see BHSI, that's a part of us as well. We specialize in everything from commercial property, casualty, healthcare liability, executive, professional lines. So we run the gamut of everything, not in this particular division, but as a whole. We can insure pretty much anything and anyone around the world, regardless of size or function. So errors and omissions. So what is errors and omissions? So first and foremost, it goes by many, many different names. Errors and omissions, E&O insurance, commercial professional liability, CPL, and PL. And I take the time to tell you all those things because a lot of people have a lot of questions about that, and it's a waste of time for both of us. So I'm just going to tell you now, those are all the different names and acronyms for what everything I'm going to be discussing is today. If you see one or the other, it's the same type of thing. There'd be different coverages with different insurance companies, but they all essentially mean and do and function the same way. So who needs this type of insurance? Anybody who claims to be an expert in any field. If you're offering a service versus a product, you should, especially if you're in the United States, where we have lots of tort liability and frivolous lawsuits, you should have a professional liability insurance covered. So it's travel agents, tour operators, meeting planners, event planners, tour guides, CPAs, real estate agents, attorneys, all of those people offer services. And in so offering that service, you're considered an expert. If you're considered an expert in offering a service, there is liability, whether you think there is or not, there is liability that comes along with being a professional or an expert in a particular field. So that is what professional liability is. It protects your liability for the services you offer. If you were a Lego company, you would have product liability. Okay, somebody chokes on your Lego, or somebody trips and falls on it, or it turns out somebody used lead paint to make it or something like that, you would have a product liability because there's a tangible thing that can cause harm to your consumer. So that's the difference, services versus tangible goods. So why is it important? Well, I touched a little bit on that, but the reality is, as cliche as it is, accidents happen, stuff happens. You may be an expert, but the reality is you're relying on your consumers to understand everything you tell them, to vet everything you tell them, to check that itinerary at least one time, not preferably the night before they're leaving on their group family trip to Brisbane, Australia. And I can tell you, I bring that up because I have that happen all the time. You send everything over there, you tell your customer to double check, triple check everything. They say yes 30 seconds after you fire off the email. I'm like, there's no way they did. And they do check it, but they usually check it. I bet you half of the people check it, a week or a couple of days, maybe even a couple of hours before they got to go, just to make sure they got the gate right. And it turns out they've got the wrong everything. Now it's too late. Now you can't fix anything without it costing a fortune. And it might be your fault. It could be partially your fault. So those are things, I mean, accidents happen, and some of the accidents you can't even control. Some of the information you don't even know how to control. You don't know that certain parts of the African continent require transit visas or require certain vaccination records to go from one territory or one state to the next state. You may not know that, or it may have changed since the last time you logged in or checked the credentials or the information to get to that particular country. So these types of things you can only control to a certain extent, and then you can't control things. The only thing you can do is mitigate the losses, and how you mitigate the losses is insurance, and specifically this type of insurance. And it doesn't matter if you've done anything wrong. If somebody makes an allegation that you did something, they make an allegation that, hey, you told them that that policy was a cancel for any reason and covered everything under God's green earth, and it would be covered. And that's the allegation, and they sue you in court because it didn't cover this specific thing for their travel insurance policy. And now you have to go to court. You may know that it's fraudulent, what they're saying. It doesn't matter. It has to be proven in court. So this type of insurance covers it, even though you may have it in writing that it's fraudulent. That would never happen, but just to get my point across, but you still have to go to defend it in court. You have to have your day in court. This type of policy covers it. So long as you're not the one who's doing the fraudulent activities, it doesn't matter if somebody else did, but you're being accused. So that's something to keep in mind. And overall, for any insurance product, the number one reason you get it is to minimize financial burden to you. You have no idea what it costs to defend yourself unless you are an attorney, or if you've ever used an attorney. You have no idea. I mean, if you have a bodily injury claim, it could cost $500,000 in legal fees if it's in court for 4 years. 90% of home-based travel agents would be bankrupt in that scenario. And that's not even getting to the actual claim. If you get found guilty, that's just the attorney's fees. So these things, they're not here to scare you, but you need to be aware that there are legal ramifications. There are expenses associated with starting a business, and you can't poo-poo them. You can't shove them under the rug, because when you do that, 10 years from now, they may rear their ugly head and there's no one there to protect you. There's no out. The legal system's a legal system. You need to have some sort of insurance to protect you there. So a couple of different examples of types of E&O claims. I sort of mentioned a few types of scenarios earlier, but somebody booking the wrong type of room or a different type of wrong type of cabin on a cruise line, or he's on the example here, an ocean view, and it's not an ocean view, it's staring at a garbage can, something like that. And it says clearly in the email from the customer that they wanted an ocean view, and you thought that you got that, but you didn't. And now they get there and they're unhappy, and they want their money back, or they take it to an extreme and say that everything was terrible as a result of not having an ocean view, and they take you to court because they want to seek some sort of damages. Other things, I was a travel agent prior to working here 12 years ago. I've made this mistake, JFK to EMD, JFK to AMS. Like, you're busy, people are busy. Sometimes people are doing these things on their phones. Very easy to mix these things up, especially when you're doing things quick. And especially if you actually have a customer you deal with a lot, where you feel natural in the motions of getting everything done very quickly. You understand this customer very well, but you also do things very quickly because you understand the customer. That is an example where mistakes can actually occur. Now, hopefully that person's a good client and there's no lawsuits or whatever, but it's an example of something where you think you may never make a mistake, but it's actually easier to make a mistake in that scenario because you are comfortable thinking it would never make a mistake. That's when they usually happen. Passport visa issues. Do they need them? Did you advise them that they should take them? Everybody thinks that that's, an obvious thing, and it is, but you do need to make your customers aware of that. And if you don't, they could sue you and say, hey, Tyra and Miguel, they never told me I needed a passport to go to Africa. That's obvious to you and I, and it should be obvious to all of us, but it may not be obvious to somebody, especially if they're maybe an older customer that may be suffering from some level of dementia or something like that. They may have forgotten that, to be honest. So it is your job to make sure you disseminate this information. And if you forget, it can be your liability. So there's another example. Certain airline ticketing issues, most airline ticketing issues are not going to be covered, and that's going to be things like debit memos is what I'm saying. A debit memo, people always ask why. A debit memo essentially is a mini contract between you and the airline stating that you're going to follow the 7 trillion rules that they have that change every day. Like, I know a lot of people don't do air ticketing because it's ridiculous and you don't get paid for it most of the time. Not a bad idea, because most of the mistakes you're going to make are going to be like debit memos, and they're not going to be covered, and they're not, just not an insurable thing at all by any insurance company. So keep that in mind if you're booking some $1 million airline ticket. If you get a debit memo, it's not going to be covered. So be very careful when you're booking it. So a couple of highlights of E&O in our policy and what you would want in your own E&O policy if you're looking for. If you can, you always want to get an occurrence form platform. So there's 2 different types of forms out there. There's occurrence form and there's claims made. Most people that don't know any better and just click online and get an insurance quote in like 30 seconds end up with a claims made. Claims made policy only covers you for the period of time that you keep paying that insurance company. So if you're with an insurance company for 30 years, like they're your best friend, you even know the executive that runs the insurance company, okay? And on the 30-year and 1 day, you decide to retire and you hang it up, you've paid them $1 million in premium and you get sued the next day after insurance, they owe you nothing because it only covers you while you have the coverage with them during that period of time. However, on an occurrence form, if you're insured with Miguel Campos and Berkshire Hathaway for all of 2023, and in 2073, you get sued for something that had happened back then, you still have coverage with me, so long as we're still here. So that's a huge difference, and it makes a difference, especially for people that are building companies to sell, or people that are nearing retirement, or people that are not sure how long they want to continue the business. You would prefer always to have an occurrence form. And I can tell you most people you work with are not going to explain this to you. So I'm telling you now because it is important and it's rarely discussed. Our program is also admitted in all 50 states. This is something also that will likely never be discussed with you. There are 2 types of programs that can be sold to a consumer. There are admitted programs and not admitted. Admitted means the commissioner, each state has a commissioner of insurance, and they have viewed our program and said, yes, we think this is good for the consumer. It is not going to mess them over. So they admit it and they say, yes, you can sell it here. Then there's the non-admitted programs that anybody can sell. Any insurance company, they could be a fly-by-night insurance company, and they can sell the program there. But if they go bankrupt, if that company goes bankrupt, they don't have any money to pay your claim anymore, and the state will not kick in funds to protect you. If we go bankrupt or don't have enough money to pay the claim, the state will kick in the funds from their fund that they keep, and they will actually mitigate and cover the cost of your actual claim. So big difference between the 2. Not saying non-admitted programs are bad. There are plenty of good programs, and there are some insurance companies that you won't be able to get insured unless you're on a non-admitted program. But just be aware of the 2 differences. Also, Berkshire Hathaway here at the Travel Protection Division, we're the only division that offers you an actual agent at the insurance company. We're not external brokers, we're not external agents. We are the insurance company. I represent the insurance company, and when you do business with me, I'm your agent throughout the whole year, and then I have an assistant that helps out with everything as well. You don't really see that in most insurance companies any longer, to be honest. You have an underwriter that will change every year. Not here. I've had clients for 12 years here. There's also what's called a duty to defend settlement. Most insurance companies will have this in there, and basically all that is a fancy way of saying, if you're sued, we do have a duty to defend you in court. Not just to cover the claim, but actually to defend you in court to innocence as well. Then there's the consent to settle provision. This simply says, this is kind of unique to this program, is before we settle any claim, we want to come to you first to make sure you agree with what we're settling on. Now, I will tell you, there is the caveat that if you decide you don't want to consent, we'll only keep fighting or litigating up to your applicable limits. Then after that, if you're like, I still don't want to, I'm not guilty, I don't want to pay anything, then you're going to have to come in with your own money and start to pay the attorneys to defend it any further. So it's a unique provision, but there is some caveats there. And then, of course, last but not least, and most importantly with this program, is that it's got worldwide coverage. That's extremely important, that you understand the difference between this program and like every other program out there is that it has true worldwide coverage, which means we can settle claims anywhere in the world that you're legally able to do business with. So if we're not able to do business there from a legal perspective, but you are able to do commerce there and you get sued, and then the suit was brought to somewhere down in South America or whatever, you could get an attorney, vet it with us, hire that attorney, and we would reimburse you for those fees. That is not done by most insurance companies. So important to know that distinction. The primary coverages that you're going to see on our policy, I'll zip through these here. Bodily injury, physical harm. I'll give you a quick example that was catastrophic the past year. Dallas, Texas, home-based agent sued for $1 million because a husband was killed on a resort in Cancun. That's still being litigated. So if you're wondering, well, what happened? Did it go anywhere? We don't know. It's still being litigated a year later. So that should tell you, even if she wins, that there's still a fortune in legal fees. And that was a home-based agent, not some $100 billion company. It's a home-based agent. So that's bodily injury, physical harm or deadly harm. Property damage. Maybe you're a tour operator and you have a vehicle that you're driving and it hits another vehicle and you're held liable for the damage to that other person's car. There's coverage there. Or somebody loses their baggage and the care or custody of one of your safari tour operators and they sue you for the lost luggage. That's property damage. Financial loss, that's essentially the E&O piece. Your error or your omission leads to a loss to the consumer. That's the financial loss. The consumer loses something because of your negligence that either you or the consumer has to pay for, and we reimburse one of you for. Host liquor liability, you don't hear much about this anymore, but back in the day, prior to 4 years ago, there were a lot of things like cruise nights. People who did a lot of cruise would have cruise nights, wine and dine potential customers and things like that. If there was an injury that happened as part of having consumed those beverages, liquor, you can be held liable for that. And if so, you would need what's called host liquor liability for coverage to apply. Fire legal liability, it's going to be not relevant to pretty much anybody. Back when everybody was a retail location and had their own little storefront, if a fire started in your place and burned down another person's place, their insurance company would sue your insurance company for that, and you would need fire legal liability. So you'll still see this in all of the policies, basically because it costs us more to take it out than it does to leave it in. But you're not paying extra for it, and it's really not relevant to you unless you have a retail location, and only relevant after you've exhausted all of your real estate insurance if there were a fire that caused another fire to somebody else. Hired non-owned auto coverage, another defining piece of coverage we have over many of our competitors. If you're a tour operator and you're driving people around or you're renting vehicles or using chauffeurs, if you don't have hired non-owned auto coverage and there's an accident or an injury and you're sued for the bodily injury or the damages to somebody else's property, you wouldn't have coverage unless you had hired non-owned auto coverage on the policy. And then last but not least is a unique coverage that came out about 10 years ago. This is travel supplier bankruptcy. This coverage, unless you have this coverage on your policy, if you make a mistake in the selling or procurement or lack of selling or procurement of a travel insurance policy and you're held liable, you wouldn't have coverage on your policy unless you had this type of endorsement on your policy, which basically opens up your insurance to your ability to have a claim covered for you selling another insurance product like travel insurance. And it doesn't matter who you're selling it for or with, whether it's a vendor or your own personal insurance company that you're working with. So who's covered under the policy? We do have a broad definition of who's covered. It includes partners, owners, officers, directors. If you're an LLC, you file paperwork and as an LLC, and then the owners that are listed on your articles of incorporation are automatically covered under that LLC. You don't have to send me if you've got 5 owners. I don't need 5 owners. I'll put them on your account, but we don't need them on the policy. You just need the LLC because your LLC paperwork will show all of those owners. And then if you have a bigger company, and you have investors and directors and officers, they're automatically covered as well. Some optional coverages that we do have that are becoming more or less basically primary coverages now is the sale of travel insurance and advertising injury. So advertising injury was a coverage not a whole lot of people asked a lot about, but we definitely spent a lot of time telling people about. So if you have a particular name and a particular logo, a color scheme and an advertising and marketing scheme, Another person or another entity, another business may have a similar one. And if they believe that your stuff is infringing on their stuff, they can sue you or send a cease and desist to try to stop you from using that information. And if they do that, the only way your insurance applies to that is if you have advertising industry coverage. Now, since everybody's online and has a mobile phone optimized social media and websites, this is a coverage that I quote everybody with it. And then if you want to remove it, you can remove it and sign off. It's $100 for the year, regardless of the size of your business. I think it's probably worth having than not having, considering the minimal cost when you factor in it's for 12 months of coverage. After COVID and during COVID, we had a ton of people reach out realizing that the insane thing like COVID could happen. And no one ever foresaw that. Everybody was starting to ask themselves, well, what maybe I would get sued for this. I don't know. But who thought the world was going to be shut down for 2.5 years, So we do have a lot more people that have this coverage than ever before. It's always been important, but I see there being an increasing need, especially as more and more people, especially younger consumers, do everything online. You've got Google that's out there searching websites. You've got Getty Images that's out there searching websites to see if you're infringing. There's entire industries out there that their whole profit margin, their whole profit thing is based off of suing small businesses and large businesses for copyright infringement. That's all they do. So there's people out there looking to find a way to sue you. And it just takes a matter of time before they find you. And if you have something similar, they can sue you into submission, essentially, unless you have somebody on your side. So it's something to think about anyways. Additional insureds, if you work with a host or you work with a consortium, they may request to be added onto your policy as an additional insured. That's entirely normal. We give it to you 5 times a year at no cost. There's a blanket waiver if you have a ton of requests. I won't discuss it now, but if you have 5 or less, you're covered. All additional insured is it saying that, I'll use a school as an example. If you're doing business with a college, they want to be added onto your policy. Because if you screw something up and it causes damages to their client, their student, they're going to get sued, but you're the one who should be sued. And so this says, hey, if I messed up, but you're erroneously being sued, we'll cover it for you. And that's what an additional insured is. I don't ever advise my customers to put that out there in the ether and offer it up as something. Their risk management people should know well enough to know if they need it or not. That's not your job. And my job to protect you. The least amount of people you can have on your policy, the better for you overall. But if they ask, it's not a problem, and it's not some weird, odd, behavior or anything like that. It's normal. Prior acts, that's only relevant if you're coming from another insurance program that has claims made. We can retroactively cover some of those acts if you're coming off of claims made. So if you're coming from a random insurance company that, if you look at your top of your insurance policy and it does not specifically say travel and tour, it's probably claims made and it's probably miscellaneous. So if you're going to do business with us, we would offer you prior acts if you felt the need to cover any possible lawsuits that could be out in the ethers yet. Limits of liability, we range everything from 100,000 to up to $10 million in coverage. I can tell you right now, there's nobody that has anything under $500,000 at all. Never has been. So typically, most people are going to have $1 million policy with a $500 deductible. Unless your sales are 4 million plus, you have nothing but high net worth customers, you do nothing but school or high adventure travel, then you may want to look at starting at $2 million if you qualify, because you'll have to go through the underwriting process. Deductibles, we can go as it says there, 500 to 25,000. Typical for a home base is 500, as high as 1,000, but there's really almost no savings for $1,000 deductible unless your sales are over 3 million. And those really, really high deductibles, those are for companies doing like 10, 50, 100, $200 million in sales. The coverage is issued when you get the policy. I bring this up because when you get your policy, it's not going to say Berkshire Hathaway Travel Protection. It's going to say Berkshire Hathaway Specialty Insurance Company. Old policies did have Stonewall. That's irrelevant anymore, so I won't go into that. And we are an A++ rated insurance company. So some of you that work with schools or high net worth individuals, they're going to ask you that they're going to want a specific rating for your insurance company because they know what that means. The higher the rating, the more likelihood of you paying your claims and not going bankrupt. So if anybody asks, like, what's their Moody rating or what's their Standard & Poor's rating, just ask us. We know what you mean, and we can tell you what the ratings are. But know that this is the best you can be. It's A++ and AA+. So you're in good hands with us. Rates are determined. This is the number one question that we get when it comes to pricing is, how is this priced when they're looking at an application? Everything in the application is going to be relevant to pricing for the most part. You're going to start out with a base price, and then it's going to go up and down based on credits and debits is what they call them, or discounts and not discounts, I guess you could say. So we're going to look at how many years of experience do you have? The more experience, the lower the risk. We're going to look at internal quality controls. Do you have waivers? Do you have terms and conditions? Do you do any kind of training? If you're hosted, what does your host do for training? Do you have any past history with claims? Number one thing that we rate off of is going to be gross receipts or total annual sales. Now, everybody gets confused with this, so I'll explain it. If I call Tyra to book me a world cruise and it's $500,000, that is $500,000 in gross receipts. That's the number that I need extrapolated for a year. So that's what we're going to look at. If you're brand new, or you're just not at all a numbers person, we can work with you to help you figure it out. We have facts and figures. We have 7,000 plus customers. So we know where a new person would be based on your location, based on your past and everything. We can figure out where you're likely to be and give you sort of a range to work within. And the nature of the travel service. If you're doing all student tours, if you're doing bungee jumping, if you're doing alligator riding, you're going to pay more. Riskier travel comes with a higher price. And I can tell you that riskier travel comes with it's a lot higher now after COVID than it probably was before COVID, with higher risk customers, in part because two of the largest competitors of ours dropped out. Like they no longer write any travel or tour operators. We're one of the last ones in the market that actually do a true travel and tour policy. So before you apply, like I said, kind of get an idea of what your business sales are for the year. If you don't have your business sales, like I said a moment ago, things to think about is if you're brand new, like, why did you get into this? That background should give you an idea of where you're going to go with it. If you're in Florida, you're probably going to do some cruises. If you're in the middle of the country, maybe a lot less cruises. If you're in Wisconsin, probably a lot of cruises, because that's where I'm from and we like to get out of here during the winter and take cruises. But your past should give you some idea of where you might be headed. So if you have a host, talk with your host on what they may recommend. If you have friends and family that are the whole reason you're getting into this, like, where are they going? What kind of trips are they doing? Start wrapping your head around that. So when we have a conversation, you can give us a little bit of information so we can have a little bit more of a productive conversation. That's not just us leading you to an answer. It's you helping us lead you to the answer that you would have come up with on your own. If you have an existing policy, just bring it up, just send it to us. We'll just have you send it to us so we can see what it is. If you have a miscellaneous policy, there's so many deficits in those types of policies that we're just going to want to look at it to see what coverages you don't have. And then if you're working with anybody that requests additional insured status, we'll want that in the beginning. We can always add it at the end, but it's just faster for both of us if we have the information up front. That way, when you get your policy, you've got everything ready to go right then and there. Risk management is a huge thing ever since COVID. This has never not been a huge thing, but it is an extremely large thing now that we sort of put more stress on the importance of waivers or terms and conditions. If you don't have them, go online to Google travel tour operator terms and conditions, start there and see what different terms and conditions are out there, what people have. Every time you buy something, you're pretty much agreeing to somebody's waivers, terms and conditions, whether you realize it or not. So you should have your own as well. It doesn't necessarily prevent a lawsuit from happening or you even winning one, but it definitely shows due diligence on the behalf of the owner. And if we do have to go to court, it's much more advantageous for us to say, hey, yeah, Miguel had these waivers saying that he offered travel insurance to this customer, and there's the signature saying they didn't want it. So I don't know why we're here. Versus, yeah, I can't prove whether or not he did or didn't ask them if they wanted travel insurance, but we do know that he should have, because 90% of agents do. So just remember, waivers, terms and conditions, they're important, especially travel insurance ones. Ongoing trainings like this, understanding the importance of travel or importance of E&O insurance, what it is, what isn't. These types of things also count for credit on your E&O insurance application. They give you credit to lowering your premium. And obviously, especially now, working with reputable, financially secure vendors. We understand that there's only so much information you can get from foreign vendors. I get it. I'm not saying you shouldn't use them. just be very careful when you do. Like vendors, when you're sending them money, don't send them all the money. And before you send them or wire any money, make sure you know exactly where that money is going. Somebody sends you an email with where it's supposed to go, call that institution, make sure that institution's valid, call that customer back directly with the phone number that you had originally to make sure that they did send that particular PDF. People can intercept your email, change one little digit in that person's name, and now it's coming from Miguel Campos, not Miguel Campos. And you think you're sending it to the right person, but you're not. In wire transfers, it's one of the biggest things we've seen for losses, and it's not covered by E&O insurance. So there's so much social engineering going out there. You need to be aware of it, and you need to be cautious, and never slow down. Sometimes never hurts to slow down and double or triple check things. So this is our contact information. This will also go out to all of you. But that's kind of all the information I had for this part. But I wanted to go into another important piece, which is host coverage. This I don't have a bunch of slides for, but I like to discuss this with everybody, because this is a big, for the past, as long as I've been here, it's been a misunderstanding on everybody's part.
Yes,
So,
and you know what, Miguel, it's for hosts on the host side. I have found that a lot of hosts don't tell their agents, they don't tell this to them. And I think that it's so important for agents to know the level of coverage that they have, because why, you need to protect them,
Yep.
as well as your company at the same time. So there's some host agencies that they don't mention it at all. They just say, yeah, we got coverage, but tell them how much coverage you got and how much are the agents going to be covered so that everybody can do their due diligence.
Correct. And during COVID, we've seen a lot of this where people had host coverage, but no one explained what it was, or more importantly, what it wasn't. It was just, you're in a meeting with the host and they say, yeah, by the way, they're just checking boxes. Yeah, you have coverage, and no one's asking any questions. And to some extent, I understand you're choosing a host based on their professionalism, based on their vendors, and what they're offering you. But if they are offering you insurance, then you should understand what it is and what it isn't, because you could go 20 years with host coverage, get sued and it not be covered, and you had no problem purchasing insurance, but you just thought you already had it. That's not a good place to finally figure out what host coverage is or isn't. It's too late. So our policy, it opens up host coverage to an independent contractor when they're representing the host's name. So a host policy, if you ever get the host policy, you are going to see the host name and the host address. That's it. You're never going to see your personal. Miguel Campos isn't going to be on there. Miguel Campos Sunnyside Travels is also never going to be on there. And Miguel's Sunnyside Travels LLC is not going to be on there, nor can it be added on there. I am not a vendor of the host. I am a 1099 independent contractor working on Miguel's own behalf, just using the credentials and, in most cases, the namesake of the host, soliciting business for the host.
So
go ahead.
So I try to explain it. If they are using Tiffany at Tiffany Travels, no coverage. But
Correct.
if they're somewhat using, not somewhat, they're using independent agent of Mommy and We Travels or independent agent of the host company's name, then there's some type of coverage there.
Correct. And where the important piece here is, if you have your own LLC, okay, and or you're just operating under your own personal name, if ever there's a lawsuit situation and somebody names Mommy and We and Miguel Campos, there needs to be two insurance policies there, because two different people are being sued. Mommy and We has a policy, so you are the independent contractor that caused this lawsuit. So you do have some coverage there, because Mommy and We is being called into the lawsuit as a result of Miguel's actions, and I have coverage there. But they're also calling Miguel in as well. There's no policy for Miguel Campos. So in that case, you got some coverage, and Mommy and We is probably going to be sued for more. Okay, so that's great, but you may be sued for an amount that you can't afford on your own either. So that's a scenario that can happen where you'd want your own insurance policy or need your own insurance policy for that whole scenario to be covered. Then there's the just Mommy and We's traveled. You know what? They're like, we're going after the big bucks. Mommy and We's the host, so clearly she's a billionaire. So they're just coming after Mommy and We. They don't mention anything about Miguel or Miguel's Campos Sunny Travels or anything like that. Fine, you're good. Then there's the last case scenario, and the worst case scenario, if you're an IC and don't have coverages, they only sue Miguel. then there's there's nothing out there. I mean, Mommy and We's doesn't even apply at all, won't respond. There would be a denied claim there unless you had your own policy. So that's the important information that you need to understand. And I can tell you, I've done this long enough. The hosts that do disseminate this information, I can probably tell you it's because I've spent 12 years telling them this information. No one ever discussed this information until my colleague, Joe Gallion, one of my colleagues here. We've spent the better part of our career educating people on how host coverage does and does not work. And if you look out on there's some pretty good travel attorneys that have some pretty good articles out there. They'll even back this up as well. That explains that the host will have a host policy. It doesn't name you. If an attorney like themselves were to sue you and they name all parties, they're better ready as many insurance policies with all those different names on there. Now, again, if you're thinking to yourself, well, what about the whole additional insured thing? Can't you? An additional insured is for somebody that's a vendor or has an interest in what you're doing to them, not for them. If I'm working for you, I'm basically an employee, but not. As a 1099, you are treated sort of like an employee without any of the employee, I guess, perks, if you will. You're your own business. And too many people, I think, in the independent contractor market don't treat the 1099 designation as you're basically your own LLC. Whether you treat yourself like that or not is whatever, it's irrelevant. You are your own business. As far as the legal system's concerned, as far as the IRS is concerned, and as far as the insurance industry is concerned, you might as well be your own LLC because every one of those entities is going to treat you that way. And most independents over the past couple of years have been moving towards getting their own LLC because there is a certain level of protection it offers you by shielding you, the person, from the business.
Yep. Even if they're with the host. Yes.
So if you're doing that, that's awesome. But then you definitely should have your own insurance policy, so that's the kind of downside. But it's not a downside. I mean, if you're running an operation like this, I mean, I firmly believe, and not just because I'm in this market, because I have been a business owner, insure yourself. It's really not, I mean, in the beginning, it's a little bit of a cost, anywhere from $500 to $700 for a typical low risk agent that's brand new, doing under $500,000. But when you figure over a 6-month period, if you take it over a 6-month period, it's not a terrible amount of money to protect yourself with what I would say is one of the top things you should do as a business owner from the get-go.
Yep.
I mean, that's one of the very first things. If you go to a bank's not going to even do business or talk with you unless you have insurance. If, most travel agents don't need to talk to a bank, but if you did, and that there's a reason why, because it's important. It really is that important. So that's how the host coverage does and doesn't work. So if you are working with a host, you should understand the host policy. And if you don't want to go through all that rigmarole, then just know that getting your own policy is the only way in which to make sure you're fully protected. And last but not least is when you're dealing with a host policy, you're sharing that limit of liability with all the other independent contractors. I mean, I have some hosts that have like 8,000 agents. So you're sharing $1 million in coverage with 8,000 people. Once that limit's exhausted, you have no coverage for the entire, I mean, if somebody gets sued in the first day of January 1st and that whole $1 million is gone, you have the next 364 days with no coverage. No. The other thing is you're never going to have an agent. Like you can't just call like your host, the independent contractors can't just call up and get all the information on the policy because it's not your policy. It has to funnel through the host. So there's a plethora of reasons why you would always want to get your own policy. At the very least, call us and talk with us to understand what we can do for you. If it doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense, but at least you've done your due diligence. That's the best you can do for you, for your business. So, well, that's all I've got for you, Tyra. Hopefully it was informative. I know it was fast.
No, not only was it fast, but it was super, super informative. I love it. I love it. Okay, so over here, is this the 378? Is that your extension?
Yeah, that actually is my colleague's. Mine's 379. I'm
Okay.
not sure, but 379 is mine on there.
Okay.
And that sales box, anything that goes there, I'll get it, and then I can funnel it to wherever it needs to go, or I'll address it.
Got it. Okay, so you did answer a ton of questions. I'm going to go over my questions and see what was answered. So
sure.
Question number one was, what forms can agents use to protect themselves better? You mentioned terms and conditions and waivers and stuff. Google it, find it, and of course, change up the verbiage,
Yep.
and then make it their own. Okay.
Yep.
Yep, terms and conditions. The next one was travel insurance. Can we explain the difference to the agents between the clients having travel insurance, them being sued, having the travel insurance versus the E&O? What's the difference?
Yeah, so travel insurance has absolutely nothing to do with E&O insurance and nothing to do with protecting the travel agent's business itself. The only argument to that is that if you're religiously selling travel insurance to your consumer, hopefully that mitigates some of the potential issues that a consumer may have on their trip to where they don't need to come to you to fix anything, and then you wouldn't need the E&O insurance. But that's a minute amount of the mistakes that happen on a trip. If you mess up the wrong dates, time zones, transpose names, none of that's going to be covered by travel insurance. Whether they have the best travel insurance on earth, it doesn't matter. Those aren't covered by travel insurance. So then they're going to come after you. And the only thing that defends you there, or protects you there, or pays out damages outside of a courtroom is going to be E&O insurance, the liability piece. So they're definitely, for clear, to crystal clear, they are not the same thing.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so my next question, you kind of went over it, but I'm more on clarifying things for the agents so that they understand. Okay, so the differences between host coverage and IC coverage. IC coverage, they have their own coverage versus them having a portion of the host agency's coverage, if the host agency even has coverage when it's time, coverage because of a prior claim for the year for the host agency side.
Correct. Yeah, the host policy is going to be managed by the host, usually one person that's going to know anything and everything about the policy, or nothing about the policy. Maybe they know nothing about the policy. They just know they have one. So you're, as an independent contractor, you're never going to know any of that information. You're not going to know that ABC just filed a claim yesterday, right, or that there's 30 different claims out there in the ether that you're not aware of, and you're the 31st and there's not enough for you, or you're not going to know what is or isn't even covered. To be quite frank, I mean, you can't just call up your host, hey, what's covered on this. They may know a little bit, but they're going to have to confide in me first and then go back to you, versus you having your own policy. Hey, Miguel, quick question. Oh, by the way, how much limit do I have? Well, you haven't filed any claims, so you know exactly how much you have, all of it, versus working with a host. Now, I will say, if it's good that hosts have insurance. I mean, I would never work with a host that doesn't have insurance. Absolutely not. I'm not saying there are any. I'm just saying that is a massive red flag for me as a business owner, if they don't have insurance and they're hosting a multiple agents. So definitely it's good that they have insurance. Just understand that they may not know everything about it, and that it doesn't cover you as if it's your own. Those are the key takeaways for that.
All right. So bottom line, regardless of whether I tell my agents all the time, bottom line, regardless of whether the host has coverage or not, and whether they're covered or not, the best possible thing is for them to have their own E&O insurance policy, correct?
Yep. And an example, if you're looking for an example that's more relevant to the global picture here, that you're trying to wrap your head around how this works, is McDonald's Corporation has a massive master policy. But then each franchise has its own policy. And then each owner, if there's investor owners that have an investment group that own multiples, that investment group is also going to have its own policy. So it's like your host is McDonald's, you are the franchise owner. And if you have an investment group on the side, they're this investment group. So there could be 3 different insurance policies. That's entirely normal. I mean, it stinks that we have to have it that way and that much insurance, but I'm just don't kill the messenger. That's just how it works. You need to be aware of how it works, and that's how it works.
I like that. Okay, I think you've answered just about everything I can come up with. I'm thinking maybe the last question that the agents probably will want to know is maybe what's the roundabout cost of E&O insurance for a new agent, somebody that's not doing, let's say, $1 million in sales just yet? What's a roundabout for on the yearly or the monthly side?
Yeah, if somebody is a home-based agent, brand new, doing less than $1 million in sales, and they're not doing any crazy customized itineraries or student travel or high adventure travel, I would probably say you're in anywhere from about probably $475 to $650 is probably where I'm seeing. That number can be a little higher, probably not going to be lower, could be a little higher depending on if you have like advertising entry added into that coverage there. I will say one thing that I will say we're starting to see over the past, ever since basically COVID started subsiding, is that we're seeing a lot of travel agents that are fitting into the tour operator category. And basically, without going into too much depth right now, if you're doing all customized itineraries and getting like net rates from your DMCs or your RTOs or your vendors, and you're pricing them up, white labeling them, you're going to fall into this custom tour operator category or meeting planning operator. Those individuals start anywhere from like $950 to like $1,400. And that's because the reason is because you're piecemealing everything. You're calling 20 different vendors and putting this all together in a package. And that is substantially more risky, because if one thing goes wrong, one thing goes wrong, the whole thing can go down. You could have a cab miss that will only cost $50 that now has cost $30,000 in losses. So that's why tour operators or custom travel itinerary makers pay more, because there is more risk, and that's the more risk that we're looking at, that example I just stated. So just keep that in mind. And obviously, we are more than happy. We spend hours and hours and hours educating our customers. We love it. We're one of the only, we take a lot of pride in that, because we're one of the last ones that does this. Like there's no other actual insurance company doing like webinars like this. They don't have the time. They don't make the time. So we pride ourselves, and I'm not bragging. I'm just glad that there are companies that still do this, because if I was on that side, I would really want this available to me, to be honest. So we make it a point to be able to do this. And I thank you, Tyra, for actually putting it out there, because without you, it wouldn't be out there, even if I was willing to do it.
I try to be as transparent as possible with my agents and with other travel agents, because it's better for them to know, than not to know, and be one of the people that was willing to, purchase their additional coverage and actually had, the funds to do it, and they didn't because they thought this or they thought that. So I'm always super transparent when it comes to that. But this was such an amazing webinar. Thank you so much, Miguel. We definitely have to get you on to another webinar to go deeper. Like my biggest thing is training. If they know, they know. It's better to know than not to know. So
yeah, no, I'm always happy to do that.
Listen, I can't ask anything else from you. Like, this was amazing. And all I can say is thank you. And if my agents have any questions, or any other travel agents that'll watch this webinar, I'll have them, you guys just go right here to Miguel's email, or you guys can email me and I can email Miguel directly. It's up to you guys. But thank you so much, Miguel.
You bet, Tyra.
We have to get you on the next one.
Sounds good. Well, thanks. It was my pleasure. Have a good day, everybody.